Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Sobchak-Bankard, and I'm here with some awkward teens. First, he's going to block you on AOL Instant Messenger. Watch out. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Insert long drawn-out story about a dead squirrel here. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
That's maybe my favorite scene. I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about this movie. And he highly recommends A Walk to Remember. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
How do you kiss? I'm good. Sorry, Jen. Just taking care of some other stuff. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for sharing your Google process with us. And last but not least, he's going to thank me on stage at the Oscars one day. It's Antonio Elefano. How's it going, Antonio?
Max has a 4.0 GPA. Chris makes videos. I'm doing great, Jen.
Perfect match. Full disclosure, I almost used he has a 4.0 for you. From love from one overachiever to another. All right. So those were all references, dear listeners, to the film we are here to review today, Sean Wang's Didi. So this was a huge hit coming out of the Sundance Film Festival where it premiered. It won the Audience Award for the U.S. Dramatic Competition films, and it is now out in theaters. You can go see it, and if you can't go see it in theaters, it will eventually be streaming on Peacock. It follows the story of the title character, Didi, who also goes by Wang, who also goes sometimes by Chris. He is a teenage boy who is just trying to fit in, just trying to get by in the world. The film takes place in 2008, so it prominently features a lot of sort of obsolete social media platforms and technology, and it is real, but it's a really coming of age story about a Taiwanese American boy. And if you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen Didi, and then we will make it very clear that we're going to shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're getting all the right angles in our skate videos after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Assuming people don't want to leave firecrackers in our mailbox and they want to catch new episodes when they drop, they can follow the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us and follow us there. You can also check us out on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review for updates on our activities, as well as see what we've been up to on Letterboxd. Our account is at LTRpod, or you can follow the hashtag LTRpod to check out each of our individual reviews. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So I want to get right into talking about Didi. What was everybody's short take?
So I loved coming of age movies. As a moviegoer, I loved them until suddenly I didn't. I became old. I'd seen enough. I no longer was interested in the plight of the young. As soon as like a 18-year-old was whatever. I get it. The genre is sort of well-trodden territory. So for me, there needs to be, at this point in my life, something more for me to be interested. And I was delighted that there was plenty of more here. There's a specificity in the setting and in the time period and in the particular character that I still felt transported into something novel, but the trials of growing up still felt relatable and true. I had just this time. It was such a fun movie to watch, and I just loved it. PT, what were your thoughts? Because I watched it with you.
Yes, this is another Antonio PT screening. We saw a pre-release screening, not to humble brag, but we got to see a Q&A with the writer-director Sean Wang afterwards, which was great. And yeah, I fully agree that this is a prime example of the specifics becoming the general, or sort of, the details make it universal, that it's just so grounded and so true to an experience that was like, I felt a lot of sort of like that online. I was sort of at the beginning of the instant messenger evolution. Like I was probably in high school when instant messenger was first coming on, and this is probably towards the tail end of instant messenger. But like that window, I still felt like I can fit in this too. I see this experience. I was not the child of Asian immigrants in Southern California growing up. However, like seeing that the specifics of what this character was going through there, just felt like, oh yeah, you see the reflection in all these different ways, which is why it's so great to get these kind of stories. And it avoided a lot of the sort of pitfalls of making things like smoothing the edges too much or making it too almost too structured. Like the fact it's this episodic kind of just story of a summer was just it was really well done, and a great execution of a coming of age story. Greg, what do you think?
I think you and Antonio should start inviting me out on your dates. Why can't I come? Just because I'm on the other side of the country. Like, throw me the invitation. I think I'm not going to speak for Jen, but I'm going to say I'm very, very closer than the two of you to this age range. I believe if he is a high school freshman in 2008, then I was a high school freshman closer to 98. So maybe that's not that close, but I think the time frame works such that this is my adolescence on screen, and it's the second time this year that has happened to me. The other being I saw the TV Glow. And like, I'm just here for filmmakers who understand me and my life being like creating these works, that it's so close. And, we talked a lot in I Saw the TV Glow, spoiler alert, there's a Fruitopia machine, and the Fruitopia machine is brilliant. And it's like so micro targeted to who I was at that age. I was like, yep, got it. I know everything about this scene. And here it's not just AOL Instant Messenger, but it's when he starts IMing Smarter Child, which was a very early AI bot that you could talk to, which I had forgotten existed, but definitely was on my friends list for a long period of time. I was just like, I was done. I was like, yep, this is a fantastic movie. This is so my experience. And so beyond those kind of trappings, I will just say this gets a few key relationships really right. We're getting too personal too early, but I will say I actually first asked my wife out on a date when we were both 16 on AOL Instant Messenger. So like
Yes.
falling in love on AOL Instant Messenger, I was there, and I did it, and we're still together. So there's hope for all you other AOL Instant Messenger couples. And the other relationship is the siblings. I have an older sister, roughly 4 years older than me. And so this also spoke to that part of my brain. And like the ways in which you hate each other, but like still find that connection was just beautifully done in a not sappy way. So like, I loved all that. I'm clearly over the moon. But Jen, this was another one you absolutely hated, right? So why don't you share your thoughts?
This is what I get for going last, I guess. So I also really like this movie. So this movie in some scenes was tough for me to watch because it does have that sort of cringe factor of, I know this character is making bad decisions and I don't really want to see it. But at the same time, that speaks to, I think, the tremendous authenticity this movie has of what it's like to be a teenager. I love the call out of I Saw the TV Glow. I think this would make a great double feature with that movie, to be like, what was it like to be a teenager in the late 90s, early 2000s, and feel totally alone and adrift, and at the same time hilarious. So I thought this did a lot of things so well, even though I was kind of like I'm so embarrassed for you right now. And I would also say that I think a lot of the sort of kind of cultural background of this character and this family really resonated with me a lot. So I grew up, my dad's family immigrated to the US from Thailand in the 70s. My grandmother was from southern China, so like there's a lot of the cultural touchstones are similar to the Taiwanese family that we see here. In particular, the grandmother character just like constantly being concerned about all the kids eating enough was too real for me. Like there, I'll elaborate kind of more in spoiler mode to get into more detail, but which scenes I think really resonated me from that perspective. But there was a lot here, and it's very subtly done. I feel like it's not one of those films that's like, this is an Asian American experience, I'm going to beat you over the head with that and the ideas about that, but it has little things in scenes that really kind of resonated with me in terms of what that experience is like. And so yeah, I think I really and then the AOL Instant Messenger factor, incredible. Just like so much of what it's like to be in a conversation with somebody as a teenager using Instant Messenger. So to go back to Greg's question, 2008, I was already in grad school, but I think this really captured, I was a late bloomer, so this really captured my college experience of like messaging people, especially that pause and the like self-editing that he does of the messages. Amazing. So but I think we're actually getting a little too far, dangerously close to spoiler mode and very detailed, which I think speaks to what this film is doing. Recommendation algorithm. So let's establish the audience of this film. I think we already kind of covered that there's maybe an age demographic that really works with this film, but maybe it's broader than people think. But beyond that, what do we feel like is the group we're recommending this to?
I mean, it's a comedy. It's a comedy that I think hits its mark. So I think it has a pretty broad appeal. Um, I think that if you were a fan of like Stephanie Shu and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that arc really worked for you, then I think this is a movie for you. But honestly, like this one, I feel pretty safe recommending to just about everybody.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to harken back to what you were saying, Antonio, if you're someone who likes coming of age stories, or you used to like coming of age stories, but you're like, I'm a little burnt out on it, I think this is refreshing enough in its execution. But how successful it is at the story, at the humor, and also again the specificity of it, that it's worth coming back. It's worth coming back around. For this, the other touch point I will say, I'll have to credit Jasmine for this, leaving the screening when we saw it, is Pen 15, which is a TV show, but is also very rooted in that sort of ICQ kind of culture of like the late 90s and early 2000s. And again, this is the late 2000s. Let's we have to dig into the fact that Sean Wang was born in 1994 and transferred into USC when all three of us were already teaching there. So I don't feel great about that personally. Good for him, but yeah, that it is a little bit later than that. But that's a similar, like Pen 15 is much more of a out and out comedy and has less maybe emotional components or nakedly emotional components. But again, yeah, that sort of, if you have any nostalgia for that zone of the early 2000s, early to late 2000s, which I guess could just be called the 2000s, then you can I think you can find a lot here. It really evokes that place and time.
The only other one I want to hit on is my internet life to this day does not involve YouTube, except when it absolutely has to. But there is a type of internet user who loves YouTube, who lives on YouTube and doesn't understand going to other places for, reliable sources for a paper for an academic class, perhaps, or something else. But so I do think if that's your particular internet, there's something kind of special and unique about the community that existed at the start of that particular platform that I believe you would see reflected here. But I am speaking from the outside of that. But honestly, I would take the coming of age angle with a lot of my friends and film loving friends who are, I hang out with a lot of Gen Xers because I'm an elder millennial. And I think there's a lot there for them, even if they don't get the specific cultural references. There is something universal about the mother son, the brother sister, and the boy girl in this case. But early romantic interest kind of plot lines, I think speak to everybody a bit.
Yeah, and I'd say that this film also really captures the feeling, the rush of connecting with friends when you're a teenager over dumb stuff. And like what is like it really captures what is hilarious to a teenager in a way that's really, really fun to watch. So yeah, all right. Amazing. So if you have not seen Didi, we're giving it a resounding recommendation. So go see it. And if you do not want it spoiled, pause us, go see it, and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. All right. So, I mean, this is not actually a very spoilable movie in the sense, but I think experiencing so much of the details of the story are joyful if you, and like that. So then in a sense, those are low-key spoilers. Everything's a low-key spoiler and there's nothing, but is there anything that's like a huge plot twist? I guess
in this movie, Nine Eye is played by WIPO. I mean, that's the big twist. I mean, going against type.
Can you explain that?
So
for
I will explain.
I have no idea what that means.
So the grandmother in this movie, Nine Eye, is the director's actual grandmother, and both of his grandmothers were in a documentary short film that was nominated for an Academy Award this past year at the 96th Academy Awards, called Nine Eye and WIPO. And the character of Nine Eye in Didi is played by the woman that he refers to as WIPO, his maternal grandmother, in real life. So that's the joke, was that WIPO plays Nine Eye. That's it. That's all I have for spoilers.
I don't know, where do we go from there?
Well, what I'm sad about is my name on screen is "Where is WIPO?" because I didn't know that. I just thought I was just surprised they edited WIPO out of the story, and now I know I should really be asking "Where is Nine Eye?" But I wanted to kind of, it's not really a spoiler piece of that, but it is kind of surprising just in the ways the film industry works that we get these two works from him kind of so close together, and it's surprising that one kind of informs the other. My Letterboxd review said the Nine Eye cinematic universe is really taking off, or something like that. But both pieces, and I did just double check because I'd forgotten. Nine Eye and WIPO felt like a front runner for a long time, and I think it's for the same kind of slice of life story kind of elements we're talking about here. And they made such a splash kind of on the awards trail when they did their interviews, and their reaction video to the nomination made the Today Show and things like that because they were so endearing. So it does end up being funny that we kind of lost a little, or we tipped the magic of this film got its hand tipped a little bit ahead of time. But it's really they're complementary, but they are very different. So I don't know if other people felt that, or you just see them as separate.
So I have to confess, because there's no way around this. I can't fake this one. I still have not seen Nine Eye and WIPO. It's
I haven't
terrible.
either.
I'm a terrible Oscar pundit.
Okay.
I know.
I mean, it's hard to carve out the 17 minutes. I understand.
And it's only free on Disney Plus, which I'm sure is present in both your households.
Yeah. Again, I do not relish making this confession at all. But my point is, I think it's useful for me to say that because I went into this movie fresh in that sense. Like the Asian grandma factor had not been spoiled for me. And I have to say, this movie made me burst out in tears and made me miss my grandma. Like, it was crazy. And like, my grandma passed away a very long time ago. Like, actually probably around when this movie takes place, now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, and I think about her fondly, but like the rawness of her loss is like not, it's, you know, long enough time has passed this, so it really took me by surprise. And it's like the scene where he's filming her and they're kind of talking to each other. I just lost
Yeah.
it. It was, yeah, it's incredible. And then like, but earlier than that, in like kind of the opening scene where this is what you see in the trailer, where the brother and the sister are yelling at each other. The grandmother having food on her chopsticks and just waving it in his face, and him being like, no, I don't want it. No, I don't. That was my life when I was a teenager. Like that like captures so much of my life experience. Like of me being like, telling my grandmother that I'm not hungry, and her just chasing after me being like, but no, really, are you hungry? Like, have you eaten yet? In the somewhat obscure Chinese dialect that my grandmother spoke, it's called Chujiao, and it's like, nobody, if you meet other people who have family from China, like nobody, like it's very, very rare that people actually speak this dialect. And so but a fundamental cultural thing that I understood as a kid was a greeting in this dialect is Jepun Aimai, and that means, the literal translation of that is, do you want rice, yes or no? And to me, this film perfectly captures that like sentiment of like, the way I say hello to you, the way I show my love to you is by stuffing food in your face and like trying to make sure you're well fed. And so yeah, that part of the movie probably was my favorite, and really, really got to me emotionally in a way that I wasn't expecting.
Greg mentioned something earlier that I want to pick up on, which is the brother sister dynamic. Um, and because the trailer has this very funny scene from them early in the movie where they're fighting, and it is very funny, and uh, it's like they just have this sort of fundamental dislike for one another, and then misunderstanding one another. And then there comes a point in the movie where Didi comes home and he's had a rough day, and he screams at his sister in a way where she realizes like, this isn't just like our normal thing, like you're hurting, right? um and one thing that I remember like growing up was watching TV shows about kids my age, and for me that was like Full House. Right, watching like episodes of Full House. And I remember that in an episode of Full House, whenever any of the Tanners, right? The Tanner
Yep.
sisters, whenever they fought, eventually either like, Bob Saget or like, or the two of them, that like that they would like have this like beautiful heart to heart where they would just like talk through whatever their issue was. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's how white people do it. um, um, my sister and I have never had a conversation like that, and that's fine. But instead, I feel like what we would do was sort of closer to what like the sister does here, which is like she just adjusts the way that she talks to him, right? And she just like, it's through what she's doing, right? Like how she makes herself available to like drive him somewhere. She's not going to tell him, I love you and please talk to me about, that's not going to happen. That conversation's not going to happen. But she helps him in the way that she knows he will accept her help, and that's enough for her, right? And to me, the way that they negotiate that relationship is just sort of like beautifully calibrated and felt really true. Um, and again, sort of like, and moved away from things that I sort of expect in a coming of age movie, and like beats in a coming of age movie. So I really enjoyed that dynamic in particular. Greg, what were your thoughts about that relationship in particular?
Yeah. So again, I had a sister 4 years older than me, and there's this kind of common fighting. We got along overall pretty well. Like, I'd be pleased if my siblings fought as little as my sister and I did. But when we had it out, it was like a big rift between us. And yet there'd be these little moments where I was sometimes welcomed into her world. So where we grew up, we had a basement full of couches and a TV, and she would have her high school friends over to like hang out and watch movies. And every once in a while, depending on the movie, she would let me kind of sneak in on the side. And I couldn't sit on the couch with all her friends, and I definitely couldn't talk. But like, I could just kind of sit there and I could watch them watch Monty Python and like see like, oh, this is cool. Like, they all like this movie. Like, and kind of learn that culture. And that kind of there. That's not a scene in this movie, but it feels exactly what this dynamic is. It's like there's just these little moments where there is a connection and something really pure comes out of them. And to me, the hoodie kind of is that same kind of thing where it's like, he really doesn't like her and seems to hate it, does nasty things to her that I never did to my sister, but then like does want to wear her hoodie, not just because it's cool, but because it says the name of her college, and he like loves her and wants to celebrate the fact that she's getting to go to that. And there's just some kind of underlying subtle sweetness to that I agree with you. It's not the Full House, like let's all like hug it out, but much more real. And then she, of course, at the end leaves him the hoodie when she moves out to college to show that it's reciprocated. And it's like, that's just perfect to me of how my sister and I related in those ways. So I thought that was really well done, even though like, and again, they leave the nastiness unaddressed, right? Like they never deal with the fact he called her, I can't say the words he called her on our non-explicit tag podcast, but did all these nasty things to her. They leave that kind of out there because that's really what siblings, in my experience, tend to do. But again, I'm a white person, so maybe I just did it wrong.
I like the idea that you were hanging by the side of the couch being like, this is what cool high school kids do in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and it's watch Monty Python. So it explains a lot. It explains where you ended up.
Yeah, true.
I'm an only child, so that all meant nothing to me in the movie. No, I'm just kidding. I thought it was really good. And again, because because of everything that you're saying, of how it isn't explicit, it isn't sort of talked through in these long, in sort of monologues or these heartfelt things. It's just these tiny moments of interaction. Again, as someone who did not have a sibling and did not have those experiences, but it felt very real. I know enough. I've watched enough. Experienced from one side or another. The friends who were either the older sibling or the younger sibling, and have seen them interact. I'm like, oh yeah, that felt very real. And I'll pivot to say that it also felt real, the relationship Didi had with his mother, which did have a couple more moments that maybe were the sort of the sharp, not like exposition necessarily, but just they were more direct with each other at times when they were talking about their feelings and what was building up inside of them. But I just thought that felt very realistic in terms of how you could talk with a parent, and even it always stayed firmly a story from the perspective of this child, this boy who's coming of age. But what you saw, these sort of glimpses, these passing moments of the mother's life, I thought was super effective, and is just Joan Chen killing it in this role. Was one of the highlights of the movie for me.
I feel like this movie is great at showing, not telling, which I think is kind of what's coming through a lot of your comments. Part it's a function of like just the family dynamic, right? Like that you're saying. But also I think it's like for us, first of all, like as a parent watching this movie, because like I did recognize so much of my own adolescence in this movie. But at the same time, I also saw it as a parent and be really dreading when my kids get old enough to answer questions with, or like, sure, good, right? Like, and then not say the silence, you know what I mean? And the hiding of what you would really want to say. I think it's so crucial that the movie then shows Chris frantically taking down all the posters in his room to impress his like skater friends and then putting it back up. Right. Like, and just showing that, but not saying it. He doesn't have an internal monologue where he shares with us why he's doing that or like that he's doing that or commenting on it. No one says anything about it. We just quietly see it. Right. And I think those are the most powerful moments of this movie, probably, of just, we get so much access to his interiority, but not in a heavy handed kind of way. It's just by looking at his behavior. And the film shows us like what he's writing on Instant Messenger and then deleting, or the videos he's deleting, right? And it's really showing kind of his struggles without him monologuing about it, which would be weird because he's an awkward teenager who doesn't tell anybody anything, right? Yeah, go ahead, PT.
I was gonna say another element that stood out to me, and maybe this is just betraying my perspective on the story, but I appreciated the level of racism from his peers towards him, and not because I appreciate racism at all, but because like no one was cartoonishly evilly racist about like him and questioning his background or anything like that, in a real sort of like get out of my town sort of way. But it was this like just like level of ignorance that was like, yep, that makes sense both for the time period, which isn't that long ago, but is close to a full generation ago at this point, and also that age where the girl he has a crush on is like, you're pretty cute for an Asian, or something like that, which is like devastating. And like another vote, as always, from the long take review for the theatrical experience, being in a full theater for that moment of like, you're pretty cute. Like you could feel people be like, oh, like he's got a chance. And then for an Asian, and just it crashes down and everyone's like, well, she's dead to me. Like this girl's done. Like we're over it. But I also like that those skater friends, like I was waiting, and maybe this is the sort of all the cliches that are avoided in the way it's not. This may be a typical coming of age story, is like, I don't think I was alone in waiting for those skater kids to turn evil and just be like, well, these guys are going to be jerks. And they like, the one kid's really weird about the like, so explain like being biracial. Basically, he's like, so you've got like someone's white and someone's not, like what's happening? But like they don't stop being friends with him because they're like, or turn on him for being like, oh, like you're an outsider, you're weird, your mom doesn't speak English well. They're just like, you're mean to your mom, and also you're not good at what we asked you to do, so we're gone. Like completely reasonable. And like, he deserved that, like for both of misrepresenting himself in multiple ways. And so I appreciated it that it didn't pull punches and like make anyone look nice or be evil but then apologize later. It was like, no, these are ignorant people doing ignorant things. And yeah, it was, that fleshed it out a lot, and still made it so tangible and difficult to watch him have to deal with it. Yeah, I thought that was really smartly handled.
And also the flip side of that is that Chris is not portrayed in a particularly favorable light either, right? Like I'm thinking of the scene where he tries to jovially call that other girl a dumb insert expletive, and he's like, I thought that was your nickname or something, and she's like, are you kidding me? Like what? And there is a scene earlier where her friend introduces her that way, right? Where, oh, she's just a, like it. So you see the tragedy of him trying to understand the world around him and just completely failing. Right? Which maybe is a good segue into the rhetorical situation, because he's misunderstanding his audience constantly. So let's go to the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. And for reference, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. There's a couple of different directions I think we can go in this, but since I kind of segued us through this question of audience, and also I would say I would throw code switching in there too, because I feel like the way that you talk to different groups and different types of people and having to navigate that is a big conflict and struggle for the main character in this movie. But yeah, what are our thoughts? Like, what are the rhetorical tie-ins that you see here?
We talked about him on AOL Instant Messenger, and PT mentioned that we watched it together at USC. So we were among a bunch of like college students. I had some of my students actually sitting like in the row with us. And one thing that I remember being delighted to like be in the presence of like all these people watching were the scenes on AOL Instant Messenger where he was deciding what to write, right? And they would just like, ooh, ah, don't. right? For every message. And so it was a way for us to sort of like get into what he was really thinking, and then how he was presenting himself, and the mistakes that he made. And even though most of the people in that room with us were not alive, or during the AOL Instant Messenger moment, like they understand that process through like texting and like you
Mhm.
deciding what to write and the strategic whatever. So yeah, that was that part of it. I thought they got really bright, and I really enjoyed. How about the rest of you in terms of rhetorical situation? How about PT?
Geez, teacher just calls on you if you don't jump in right away.
Crackheads
I
are gays to it.
I do. I fully agree with that. And again, another mark for the seeing it in a crowd in a theatrical experience. This is the kind of small movie you can talk yourself into waiting on until it comes home, because there's no special effects and there's no big, again, the only explosion is just like a mailbox, and it's the very opening thing of the trailer, so you're okay. But like the experience of the emotional connection to that is great. And yeah, the him jumping over to like other windows to be like, what is this movie, like what does her MySpace page say that she likes? Okay, well, like, yeah, like that movie is like, oh, what do you like about it? Looking up that movie to be like, what happens in this movie? Like, really, yeah, that's really smart. I mean, I think when introducing the picture, Jen already sort of stumbled over like the multiple names, that he's Chris, but he's Wang Wang to some of his friends, but he's Didi to his family. So I mean, it's he has these different guises that he puts on or has to live in, that are not always his choice. So it is an interesting and I think a effective thing to think about when we get into the classroom with students. A lot of times, one of the things for the first few weeks, but sometimes for entire semester, is like, you are already doing a lot of this communicating. You're doing this texting. You're putting a lot of things into writing, and you are finding ways to put yourself into that, whatever self you are, whether it's you're applying for a job, you're writing to a professor, you're just like messing around with your buddies, you're writing back home to like your grandmother, whatever. Like, there's different ways that you communicate. And I think, yeah, this does a good job of showing the ways in which that gets built up, like in your formative years, and the tumult it can cause when you're just trying to navigate, like, I don't really know who I am, and I'm trying to be like different, these, at least three in this movie, probably four or five different people to others, and I don't know which one of that is real, if anyone is actually real.
This movie made me think a lot about the concept of identity being performative, which is like a critical theory sort of thing that, I'm not going to over explain because it's not that interesting, but the just the idea that identity, there isn't any one pure or true identity that a person has. It's all about the sort of face that we put on for particular people that we communicate with, right? That's a pretty reductive definition of it, but like that's essentially the idea as it relates to this movie, is that, one of the most awkward moments in this is when he says to Maddie, when they first kind of speak for the first time, they're hanging out in somebody's room, right? He says, all my friends call me Wang Wang. And she's like, well, what do you want me to call you? And he really should, in that moment, it seems like, say Chris, right? But he says, well, like, you can just call me Wang Wang too, right? Like, it's just like, no, like, what are you doing? And so he is trying to figure out like how to he's learning through the course of this movie that, and I think it's the kind of the wrong message, that he has to perform for people to seem cool, right? But at the same time, he's misunderstanding how to do that. Like, he's not doing it well. So it's both the tragedy of he's not sort of embracing who he really is or trying to figure out who he really is. He's just doing it to kind of impress other people and changing it when he thinks that's not working. But at the same time, he's also doing it poorly. So it's like he's not even like getting anything out of it by doing that. And so it's extra tragic, I think. But yeah, I guess, like, what do you think the movie's trying to tell us about identity and kind of, especially in a coming of age context, and like how he kind of like takes on these different personas. Because with the skaters, he introduces himself as Chris and sort of like starts a whole new life with them, right?
Well, going forth stinks because you all stole pieces of what I wanted to say. So I'm going to speak directly to the people who zoned out during those comments and just repeat. No, I was very much honed in on exactly what you just said, Jen, and how you phrased the question to me is exactly right. And we have made a lot of hay about how fun it is to see these references to the time period. But why they aren't just superfluous references is because this is how people our age actually constructed our identities, right? That I'm going to out you, Jen. Your instant messenger name is still your letterbox handle. You are a grown ass woman and you are still like, that's still a piece of your identity, right? And I'm saying it about you because I changed mine like 3 months ago. Like it's important to, I think, for people not of this micro generation to understand that this was a key part of how we came to be. And I actually don't think there's an A/S/L joke in this movie, but like, which would be age, sex, location, which was a question you got asked a lot at that time period. But it was, 90% of the time you would answer that honestly, but every once in a while, like, what if I say New York? Like, what'll happen? Like, can I say Texas? Like, sure. Sorry, Antonio did say Texas, but like, wherever you could try on these other identities, and that is an important part of the early internet. That the old New Yorker cartoon on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? And so you can try on who you want to be. And I think modern internet is so much more scary, and it's much more about finding an established group that you can join and become a part of, right? We hear about, I hear it particularly for queer kids growing up in a location that is not queer friendly. Finding the online queer community can mean so much. But that also, I mean, that's almost any micro group, right? Like, it doesn't have to be an identity thing. It can be like your interests or what have you. And yet it wasn't quite the same thing, where we were a generation that, we could lie about who we were because we could try out this version of us and nobody would go find our MySpace profile or what have you. And that to me is at the heart of the coming of age. And this is finally getting to your question, which is like, that's what good, healthy teenagers have to do. You try on who you want to become and you see if that's the right fit. And my son is younger than this, but like, I've watched him try on, like, am I a soccer guy? Is that like who I am? Or am I going to join the band and I'm a band guy, and fill in every category. And the fact that happened online for so much of our time period is like really special and unique. And that's what made me love this movie so much, is it validated that. I wouldn't go so far to say it was healthy, but that it was normal and that it was meaningful, right, to do this. And where you're pointing out, Jen, that Chris makes every mistake in the book. Yes, you cringe because that's the comedy of it. But at least I was like, I did that one. Yep, I did that one too. Oh, yes, I definitely lied and said that was my favorite thing and then had to Google it, and on and on. And my opening joke, the small beauty of like, how do you kiss? Like, now on the internet, that would probably lead you down terrible things. But there's this weird time period where it was like you could ask this question and get like a legitimately good person trying to help you learn how to do that. And it's just, that to me is where the power is in this. Rant over.
Um, Quincy and I teach high school students in the summer when they come to live at USC, and in my last little thing to them that I tell them on the last day, I always say that that when you're really young, when you're growing up, like, you want nothing more than to like fit in and to like find your people. And then when you're older and when you're like our age, like, you want nothing more than to like stand out, right? And this gives me a transition into the representation of like the mother. Um, we've mentioned Joan Chen in particular, but um, part of what I really loved about her was like, she's this sort of aspiring artist, and you see her doing these paintings, and you see her sort of disappointments happening because she doesn't place in a show or doesn't get whatever she needs to, whatever, right? Um, and like to me that was more than just sort of like the texture of of the character. It felt like um uh the movie was expansive enough to like include the disappointments that happen for with the adult characters as well. Often in coming of age movies, it's just sort of like adults versus kids, and like the adults are just like it's just their authority figures who want to define their kids, and particularly when you're dealing with like an Asian American tale, right? Like I went to law school with the woman who coined the phrase, Amy Chua was a professor at Yale Law, and she coined the phrase "tiger mom," right? And this Joan Chen's character is not a tiger mom. She is she's flawed, um, but she's compassionate. Like you can tell that she has like she wants the best for her son, but she doesn't push him in the way that we often like that character. As soon as you see that mother, that's what you think is going to happen in that scene. So I really loved the way that relationship played out. I also loved the way the relationship between the mother and the grandmother played out, because one of the more harrowing moments in the film, one of the ones that seems sort of like most traumatic to Didi, was watching the mother and the grandmother fight, like have an all out fight with some really raw things being said. And one of the moments of love that the sister shows toward Didi is sort of like recognizing that, seeing that, and sort of pulling him away from it, because like you're not ready for that. But I found the presentation of that moment to be really raw and real, and those and again, I was happy that that the movie was generous enough to allow us that moment and that perspective as well.
Yeah, and actually, what you're saying is making me think that she is also struggling with, well, who am I really? Am I the dutiful wife? Am I
Yeah.
the homemaker? Right? That I know it's like a really old fashioned term, but I think that's what they would have used probably in 2008. And not that that was that long ago. But yeah, I'm saying that like it's like in the olden times, in 2008. But and she's like, am I allowed to have my own interests? Can I be an artist? Can I be a mother? Right. And she's really, you see the struggle there as well. And so I think, yeah, that's a really good call that her struggle is actually mirroring Chris's more than you would think.
And it also feels like part of that identity is like, am I kind of a single mom now? Because the husband, doesn't seem to have, is sending money home, it seems, but like is not there and has no target for when he'll be back. So, that's just there kind of on the periphery, but it's we get the experience of how the kids experience that. And it's it's sort of glancing mentions of it, of like, no, your father won't be back for before you leave for college, and or seeing the mom and the mom and her mother-in-law fight over it, and then, like Antonio said, being removed from that in a show of kindness. So yeah, I think that that is really smart in how it's executed, because I think a movie that wasn't as intelligent about how it's constructing this would have both explained that more, uh, and also probably had the mom be like, at the end, be like, but I'm so happy because like we're just happy together. And it doesn't feel like the mom is like, yeah, I'm really loving my life at the end, even though it's like, no, like, to be clear, like, I love you very much, you're very important to me, but also all this kind of sucks. Like that is still kind of, it's still messy at the end. And the other thing I'll just say about the sort of identity searching for our main character is, it feels relevant that the choice was to have this be the summer before high school begins. It does feel like going into high school and then going into college and then obviously coming out of college, those are these big threshold moments when folks can really have a chance, whether they are aware of it or not, they have a chance to recalibrate their identity and reset who they are and their positioning within the world around them. And so I think that's another part of it that is, the general of many people have that experience if you come up through the American education system, you recall that sort of like, oh wow, what's it going to be like? What's going to happen? And then at some level being like, well, who am I going to be and how am I going to fit in? And so I think that's a good sort of general thing for the movie to embrace, to get into some of those specifics of Taiwanese American in California, like what their story is.
Does anyone want to shout out their funniest moment that they thought, or the thing that made them laugh the most, especially something we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I already mentioned but it's that whole squirrel thing where he's like, I have a funny story about this squirrel, and he just keeps going. He just keeps digging into it. To bring it to a rhetorical situation, zero audience awareness, keeps going. Everyone's very uncomfortable. I shouldn't say zero. There's like 10% audience awareness, but he's like, I'm just going to keep digging and see if I like find my way out of this hole. And, I mean,
his friend, whose name I think is Fahad, tells him not to tell the story. And that's the other funny thing is like his other core group of friends that he kind of falls out with, and then maybe question mark at the end could kind of reconcile with. They seem way better at code switching of like, okay, we're talking to girls, so don't mention the squirrel story, right? Like, and whereas Chris is sort of like, he's actually coming from more of a place of authenticity, because he was like, well, I thought this was funny, so like, but yeah, the whole squirrel thing, because it escalates so much, is like, it gets to a point where you're like, oh, clearly this must be the end of it, and then they keep going, where it's like, and then we put it in a mailbox in the like, so funny. And then doesn't the squirrel come back in like when he accidentally takes shrooms or something, or some sort of like hallucinogenic drug? Doesn't the squirrel come back
with the voice of Spike Jonze?
That's amazing. Because don't they mention Spike Jonze in the movie?
I
like
think
doesn't
so, because of like
skater kids call him. Yeah. They're like, well, we got a regular Spike Jonze, which why they know who Spike Jonze is. I have questions. That makes them cooler. But
yeah, I mean, Eternal Sunshine.
Yeah,
like, I could see they're high school kids, so they would have watched Eternal Sunshine.
Okay.
It didn't make me laugh the most, but something that we haven't shouted out, I loved the scene where they went to McDonald's. Because I think there's a particular immigrant mom valence to it, but just the mom cutting up her hamburger with a fork and knife still resonated with me, because I was like, I had a grandmother who did things like that. One of my favorite memories of my grandmother is when she explained to me how she can make a Cheez-It last for 3 bites. And so that just exactly that was, I was like, yep, that's the same kind of, just no kind of understanding of each other. And he does the seafood thing. And like, it's kind of this microcosm of their relationship, but also that you can never, I shouldn't generalize it, I can never quite love Chris. Like, I like the journey he's on and I like his growth, but he's just a little like, I kind of hate this kid at the same time. And like, if this were not like the star of a movie or one of my kids or anything like that, I saw this kid out in the world, I'd be like, what an a-hole. Like, I couldn't put up with him. But so I just love that edge of it. And, there's something, I think there's an America, valence to that because of what McDonald's represents in this country and all that. It just kind of really worked as a little scene for me.
Well, and also just under his breath, he's like, you're so Asian. And that really resonated with me, because it's like, they're definitely, the way I thought about my identity racially, ethnically, definitely changed a lot as I got older. Like, and I definitely remember when I was that age, it was embarrassing and not cool, because all you want to do is fit in. And it was even probably more extreme for me, because I grew up in suburban Massachusetts, where I was like one of like two or three Asian kids. So it was like, whereas like this is
4 now. Come on, give us
but this is the Bay Area, where it's actually a lot more. It seems a little bit more diverse, and still he's like embarrassed to be Asian. So I guess it's good to know that if I lived in California, I would still have had the same problems. Yeah, but then it's also sweet, because he very grossly opens his mouth full of food, and she's like, no one wants to see your ABC already been chewed. And I'm like, the fact that she knows what ABC means is like makes like she's trying to connect with him, because that would have been something that she would have learned that kids say or something, right? So it was very cute. I really liked the fish, where the fish is like, and that's why, like, he's like trying to hype him up.
Oh yeah.
He's like, that, and that's, you're the best, and that's why Maddie loves you. Like, it was, I just thought that was really, I like that the movie had just very minimal but still very present sort of surreal moments like that.
I loved. I didn't know. I found parts of these elements funny, but I love that the sort of Get Maddie storyline, which in a lesser movie would have been just sort of like the totality of the plot, um, was just like act one of the movie, and and I love the way that all of that was sort of handled. You know, it's a sort of awkward truth of adolescence that you find yourself attracted to someone, but then you're unclear as to what happens when it turns out they're a little bit attracted to you too. And I thought that the "Are you nervous?" scene was really well done. I thought that that the sort of fallout from it was really like that. I agree with Greg. I would not like this kid. Like he would not have been like my best friend growing up. Um, but um, but I think that I was most sympathetic to him in the moments in which people were giving him stuff for like that, right? Because he just like wasn't ready for whatever that was, and that's fine. um but you know, he takes a lot for it. And I liked that at the end of the movie, when he sees Maddie again, and it seems like, oh, it's maybe they'll whatever, right, they'll rekindle or whatever, and instead she's just like, yeah, you hit my friend. So we're not going to be friends. And he's like, yeah,
Right?
that's
Why would I
fine.
talk to you?
Right.
Yeah. And he just sort
But
of accepts
also,
that
like,
it's going to be fine.
in that moment, it becomes clear to me, and maybe it was obvious earlier, and I just didn't pick up on it, but the way that Max is the like GPA 4.0 kid, right? That he
Yeah.
punches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was Max's friend, or what did he actually punch Max?
So I think
thought it was.
Max. Oh, is it? It is the friend. So Max is the one
Yeah.
that the moms are friends, and it's whoever the other kid is. But that is the friend of Maddie, right?
Right.
Because when
and
she says,
Maddie
"You
had
beat up my
told the
friend,"
story of what they had said to each other.
right?
how-
And so
yeah.
I didn't realize in that moment that's how he knew, and then I was like, "Ah." Like, so again, like, no one comes out clean in this, right?
Yeah.
Even Maddie, who's supposed to, like, and again, in a lesser movie, the crush is usually flawless, right? Or like idealized in some way.
Yeah.
And so the fact that she is also kind of guilty of bad behavior or making mistakes, right? And she also arguably deals with it incorrectly, right? By telling other people, right? Like, instead, you know, I mean, he's the one who blocks her, so that's probably the most painful moment in the movie, where he just the mouse
just
hovers over block.
The old wounds you open up by mentioning the blocking, right? Like, it's funny how that meant so much, you know, but that's how you said
that.
Yeah. Yes.
I was just saying the sound of the door closing hurts.
Yeah.
Right, and the idea of like when you heard the door opening and closing, you're like, you look at your list to be like, oh, who's here, right? Like, I remember that.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Being a teenager,
you said she's also guilty of being unkind, but I would just say is also a teenager, right? Like, that's why I think these are so wonderfully rendered, is that like the teenagers are not perfect, and this movie embraces that as much as I would not be friends with
fumbling
Chris.
and trying to figure out.
Yeah.
All right.
There's beauty in the fumbling.
Let's go to Oscars watch. All right, so this is to me, at least, this is a pretty small movie, and it's not, the quality of it is not what it would prevent it from getting Oscar traction, but it's more the visibility and kind of the fact that it's a small coming of age movie. But what are your thoughts? Like, does this have any chances at the Oscars?
I feel like we've said this across multiple episodes for the last few months, but it is very dependent on what happens with the other movies that are going to come out. I do think there has to be a decent number of movies that folks don't like and don't respond to that will open the door for this to get a lot of traction. It looks like I left assuming, well, like this can get slotted in for original screenplay. Like this is the kind of movie that when you look back years later, I'm like, that's the first category I want to look at are the two screenplays. I guess the first two categories, because it's always like, oh, that's where there's interesting stuff. Like there's interesting movies in there, and that may have gotten missed in other places. But in looking around at like predictions, the even above potential original screenplay is Joan Chen in supporting actress. She's not in the sort of top 5 prediction right now, but she's in the next 5 in the various sites that look that far ahead. And I can definitely see that because I think that she does a great job in this. It's hard to not leave this movie feeling like feeling great about her as a performer and also feeling for her character. So I kind of feel like those two are the ones that have some real chances. And for now, again, depending on what else is out there, I might think supporting actress is more likely over screenplay. Just the nomination, not a win.
Did all of you know that Joan Chen was on Twin Peaks?
I did
only because I looked her
afterwards and then found out. Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, like look up if listeners, if you're with us, like just Google image Joan Chen Twin Peaks. You'll be blown away. She's like she's like perfect noir look. Like it's amazing.
I agree. Those are the two that I think. I think that for a successful Oscar campaign, it's going to be dependent on. I'm going to be looking at the Golden Globe Awards. Didi feels like it should be. It would have to get into the best comedy film category, and I think it's possible. I think it's entirely possible with that body that it could get there. And then if that happens, maybe it can ride the wave to screenplay and Joan Chen. Greg, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard road for this film. But to what you just said, Antonio, it strikes me that like if it can pull off a surprise best comedy nomination, which there's usually a little wiggle room on that side. Some that hadn't. I think that this is the kind of film that a nomination could do a lot for and get a lot of people to see it. And so that would be the win, even if it doesn't go any further than that. I was playing the same game that I played last week when we talked about Sing Sing, which is like when we look at focus features, what else are they kind of pulling for? And the first thing that came up was bike riders. And I was like, oh, okay. So if they run Jodie Comer out of that and then they could run some here, that's not a lot of work. But then, of course, they are the ones in charge of Conclave and releasing Nosferatu. So they are busy in the back half of the year. And no slight on this film or its quality, but I do think those bigger chances are going to take up a lot of the campaign budget and bandwidth.
Yeah, to me, this feels like a movie that's going to end up on a lot of critics, like sort of top 10 for the year or something like that, or like really be like the should have been had more Oscar buzz. But it seems like a perfect candidate for the really good movie that is just so small it gets lost in the shuffle later on in the year. So, yeah, which I hate saying that because I would love to see it get nominated. But
can I just say I think there's space for a special achievement award for the four of us, born between 1978 and 1983, acting as if we're in the same generation as this 1994 born character. Be like, oh, this micro generation that we're all in, 30-year-olds, like that's us. We're all right there.
Well, like again, maybe we're all just late bloomers because I feel like I had this experience just like 10 years later than the main character of this movie did. We should get our own Oscar for that. All right. So thanks to everybody. I'm so glad we got to talk about this movie. I wasn't sure if we were going to. I'm glad we made the time for it. It's definitely worth seeing. If you're listening to this somehow, it's even if you heard us, talk about details of what happens, it's still worth seeing. It's a great experience. Antonio, where can folks find you on the internet? And I know there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, AELEFANO. Greg, where can people find you?
I will be here a lot more with Antonio because we're headed into Antonio movie season. Everybody, we're headed out of blockbuster season right
Yeah.
into fall festivals, and that's where I'm excited to be. It's we didn't have time to go through like all the announcements of the festivals that have started to trickle out, but like there's some. It's going to be a small year, but there's some really good stuff coming, and it's going to be great conversations here. If you don't find me here, you can find me anywhere else I am online at EyonCanon, EYEONCANON. Other than screenings of Alien Romulus, where can people find you, PT?
Because you said we're entering into Antonio movie season and we didn't really do movie news, we should at least glancingly note that We Live in Time got a little meme juice with the new still from it, because it's Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh on a carousel horse, and the carousel horse looks insane. Like it just looks like it's seeing war crimes, and people were just inserting the carousel horse head into other various images for a few days this week.
Oh gosh.
Being a
All right, I just looked it up.
Being a movie completist, I went to the Colleen Hoover It Ends With Us, and I will tell you that crowd went nuts for that trailer. So Antonio's pick has some life, because it's going to do really well, because It Ends With Us is also overperforming right now. So
there we go. Anyway, people can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can find the show there as well at LTR Pod, or search reviews for the hashtag LTR Pod. And you can find each of our individual posts and see what we've been watching. To keep up with the show, you can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. Or you can just subscribe wherever you're listening right now, wherever you spent the last hour or so with us. Hit subscribe, maybe leave a review, maybe leave a rating that helps increase visibility for us. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, or as people in high school call me, Sop Chop.
Great.
And my brother was Lil Sop Chop, and may or may not have also been called Chopsticks. I feel like I needed to mention that. I'll never have reasons to share that detail in any other review. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Greg was correct, except my AOL Instant Messenger handle was Qui-Gon Jen 007. Can't forget that last part. I was cool before I knew it, or me now thinks it's cool. Back then, I probably didn't realize it was not cool. Wait, what were everybody else's? I feel like I shared my AOL Instant Messenger. Does anyone remember?
I mean, mine was boring. It was like PTM 78 or something like that, or PTM 2000, because I was class of 2000 in high school.
I was Greg Cast 56 until I adopted Obi-Wan Cast, which is who I was when Jen and I became friends in real life, but also on Instant Messenger. And shout out, the one that always stops my heartbeat is Pirouette 83, which was my wife. And that was the door opening noise that I flicked over to see, is it her? Is it her? So, it worked out.
Love it.
My initials are ACE, ACE. So I think it was ACE, maybe 1999. That's when I graduated high school. So that might be mine. Yeah.
Further proof that this movie, very hyper accurate.
I like the idea that there was a Qui-Gon Jen already. And so you're like, well, I got to add 007, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I have a license to kill. Conversations.
I had a Tomorrow Never Dies poster on my college dorm room wall.
There it is.
So it was a part of my brand for sure. All right, I don't know how to end this episode now.
The door close sound.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes, as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.